Hi, everyone. This is Flavia from Aura Collective, and today we're meeting with Bianca, who is our in-house astrologer and the person that feeds us with all her beautiful wisdom around spirituality, astrology, human design, and much more since almost 3 years. Is it possible? Oh my God.
Yeah, because we started 2021, right? And it's the end of 2023 somehow.
Yes. Crazy.
Yeah.
But today we're meeting because Bianca, you are hosting our upcoming class here at Aura Collective. And as you know, if you're listening, if you follow us, if you've been following us for a while, here at Aura Collective, we look at different aspects of health and different holistic pillars that make up your health and well-being. And this month we are dedicating the month to spirituality. And as always, we like to give you many different angles to look at these pillars. And Bianca has been working on a class that we called Spirituality 101, I think, or Spirituality for Beginners.
Spirituality for Beginners, unofficially Spirituality 101.
101. Because when we were chatting around about this class, we were thinking just what is the best support we can give our community. And, on such a broad theme, such as spirituality, where it's so individual as well, how you approach the topic. Spirituality doesn't only mean going to church or praying every day. It can mean so many different things. But Bianca, maybe let's start off by asking you what inspired you to create this workshop, and if there was anything particular, like a moment or an experience that sparked your interest in this diverse field.
Yeah. So when it came to coming up with this workshop and this specific topic, I was thinking about, okay, the last class I did for Aura was Human Design 101. And I think at one point I was thinking about something along the lines of life purpose or something, and, how I would explain that maybe with human design, maybe with astrology. And I was like, you know what? That seems a little bit complicated. I think especially for these aura sessions, it's more helpful to have something a bit more accessible and a bit more entry level, like not in a way that it's boring or basic or whatever, but just to kind of accept that people are coming from like various backgrounds and places and situations and whatever. And so, yeah, I was just like, oh, how about spirituality for beginners? Because I was just thinking about all the different, I don't know, spiritual teachings, modalities, whatever that I've learned, that I've used in different ways, and how they've benefited me and how I could maybe share little snippets of them in a way that's really digestible and fun, hopefully, to support people without making them feel overwhelmed, let's say, because spirituality is very broad, is very vague, is very personal at the same time, can come with a lot of baggage, for those of us that maybe grew up religious or whatever, our parents had certain beliefs about things or they didn't, thinking about things like faith can feel uncomfortable or scary or like not something that we want to connect with, which I totally understand. So I want to come at it like not super seriously, playfully, but like still honoring all of the different traditions and things like that I value or that I think might be useful to people.
Yeah, it's that's a great approach, and it's really intriguing how you've like really integrated all these various spiritual philosophies like Vedic philosophy, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Zen, Buddhism, and even science in what you're going to teach during the class. So I was just I I was just curious, how are you going to navigate these different paradigms and to create a cohesive and accessible experience for beginners, for people diving into all of these new realms?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'm not going to necessarily try to dive into anything too complicated or, whatever. Just kind of keep it, I don't want to say surface level, but yeah, we don't necessarily need to get into details or whatever about things, but I also kind of want to present it to people as like a almost buffet of different things. And when you're at a buffet, you might not want every single thing that there is to offer. Maybe you want 3 things, maybe you want 7 things, maybe you just want 2. Whatever you want, really, whatever is resonating with you. And hopefully it's something you can like look back at, or if I introduce one concept, then and you're really like stoked about it, you can research it deeper, or I can, send you resources and things like that. So I think I'm just like, it's like a personal process of me kind of selecting things that really stand out to me and like trying to present them in a way that makes sense to people. It's honestly an experiment, because I was saying before, like I've never taught something like this, but I often think about what like 5 years ago Bianca would need or be intrigued by, and it would maybe be something a little bit like this when I was really deepening my own spiritual understanding of my life and the world,
Yeah. And I love that you are offering this to us and that you're offering your own experience, your own perspective, and giving us also this invitation to hear you out, see if there's anything that can speak to us personally, and then really go and dive deep into the things that sparked some curiosity or that you might feel that resonate with you. And that's exactly the whole point of Aura Collective, actually. It's to just give you some seeds that you can put in your pocket, and maybe one day that seed will, bring something, sprout into a little curiosity, a little bit of interest, and then you can dive deeper into the topic. And I guess if I can share something personal, I was thinking you were speaking, I was thinking about my meditation journey, and how I started with very strict kinds of meditation. And I explored the world of meditation because I know how beneficial it is to my brain, to my overall mental health. Um, but I've always had this sort of resistance against the practice, until I came up with, actually, it's called primordial sound meditation, which it comes from Vedic philosophy. And your teacher gives you a mantra, which is the sound that the universe was making when you were born.
Wow.
And I mean, I couldn't believe it either at the beginning, but if I repeat that mantra over and over and over and over again, I can go on meditating for like past 20 minutes, which is huge for me, especially when I started and I had so much resistance. And I'm going into all of this just because personally, that was a field that I was struggling with, and just having these different seeds and these different ideas to dive into really really allowed me to find what best suited me. And it reminded me a little bit of the concept of this class, which is really to inspire you to look further beyond maybe the way you've been educated around spirituality. And as you said, there's so many cultural norms around spirituality, but it really is such a personal practice. And as you said, 5 years ago, you didn't have the same spiritual practice. So it always evolves, and it can always change. And that brings me actually to my next question, which is, in this world where spirituality is sometimes super abstract for people, how can you ensure that like the tools and the teachings that you're going to provide in the workshop actually have a practical application in our daily lives, regardless of our beliefs?
Yeah. So for some reason, I was just reminded of something that Salome said on my podcast recently, kind of about mindset and energy, because sometimes we can take those things for granted. But she was explaining, I don't know, if you feel like frustrated about something and angry and whatever, and then you try to move through your day like that, you're probably going to experience a lot of frustrating things not going according to plan, etc. If you instead come with a different energy and a different mindset of like, okay, maybe this is a tough day, but instead of assuming the worst, let's just try this and see what happens. Usually things will flow a little better, right? So that's just one, to me, that's kind of spiritual, right? Without thinking of it in that way. Because I think we make it so complicated, or people make it seem like you have to have crystals and you have to meditate every day and you have to do XYZ in order to be a quote unquote spiritual person. It's my belief that we all are, you know what I mean? Whether or not you claim that for yourself, like that's fine. But it's my belief that, and lots of people say this, that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, right?
I was about to quote that.
Yeah.
We just posted that on Aura, actually.
Yeah, I love
Such
it.
a good quote.
So even things like that. And for example, I find, especially the work of someone like Joe Dispenza, but there's other people too, he's coming at things from both a spiritual perspective and a neuroscience perspective. And there's little things that you can do in your day that you'll find shift things, so it's things like that. So I will bring some kind of smaller practices that you can take with you to see some shifts. And I think sometimes like journaling can seem so basic, but that kind of reflection and that kind of space can really bring things out of you. For example, especially if you do a kind of journaling that's a bit more almost automatic, like you can have a prompt, but instead of, trying to edit everything you say as you're writing, you just kind of go for it, and you'd be surprised what comes out of you. And to me, that alone can be a spiritual practice, because you might be accessing your subconscious or some kind of hidden part of you, or something that's maybe outside of you. That's what I would interpret. And I also think many people speak of creativity as a spiritual thing. A lot of really amazing creative people can't always say from A to Z how they made something or how they wrote something or how they composed something, right? It's just this maybe inspiration that strikes them. So you can call it inspiration, you can call it God, you can call it channeling something. To me, that's also a form of spirituality.
Totally. I was also thinking about my own definition of spirituality, and how what came up for me when you were speaking is just the connection with oneself, which we lose track of somehow in our daily lives, in our crazy daily lives. Truly reconnect with yourself on a daily basis is in itself a spiritual practice. Being able to reconnect with our environment as well, so important. We often are so disconnected from our environment. And I would say that's my own definition, but it doesn't have to be anybody else's. I mean, it's just It's just the way I perceive it and the way I feel connected in some way to source, to God, to the universe, or whatever you want to call it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, really love that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And you bring up such a good point about the connection to self. And some of us might think that it's selfish or unnecessary, blah, blah, blah. But the way I see it is the deeper you understand yourself, probably the deeper you're going to understand the world, because you're not so incredibly unique that this thing you went through can't possibly relate to something else or like a larger world problem, right? One of the other principles I'm going to share with everyone is that we're all interconnected, right? And so, if I'm doing some work on myself and I kind of uncover some sort of pattern and we talk about it, maybe you have a version of that too in a different life domain. But you know what I mean? Like I remember hearing this little tidbit that really was so interesting to me is like, if we were not meant to learn from each other or not truly interconnected, we would all maybe live on like different planets or something just alone, but we don't. And actually, one of the most interesting spiritual practices is seeing yourself reflected in other people and vice versa, right? And that's also, yes, we learn about ourselves, we learn about other people, we learn about so many different things. So that's a really interesting thing to look at too. And I'll be definitely speaking about that. And then it's reminding me of one of the 7 Hermetic principles, which is as above, so below, as within, so without. So it's like the microcosm is always somehow related to the macrocosm. So it's the same kind of principle. This is also used in astrology as well, right? Like the macrocosm of the planets and everything, and how what's going on with them affects us on a microcosmic level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And actually, I had a question because you're mentioning, interconnection, and it reminds me a little bit of quantum physics. And I know you mentioned you wanted to incorporate some concepts of quantum physics in your class.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to maybe pick your brains about these like scientific concepts and, how they can help us enhance our understanding of spirituality and, bring us closer to it.
Yes. So, disclaimer, I'm not a scientist. Like the last formal scientific education I have is like high school biology, which was fun, but it's been a long time. But it's really interesting to me. Like when I think of quantum physics and spirituality, so many things come to mind. But one thing that comes to mind is human design, right? Which was this system channeled by this guy in the 80s, but it combines so many of these different modalities that, I've explored, such as Kabbalah, the I Ching, Vedic chakra system, astrology, some other stuff. Anyway, the way that the guy who channeled it / founded kind of human design, Ra'aruhu, spoke about it was sometimes in very scientific terms. For example, he has this lecture on it that he did in 1994, and he explains some aspects of quantum physics before he even starts really talking about human design. Because one of the things that's very central to the system of human design, which, I've talked about it before in my course, but just, it has a lot to do with our own individual energy and how it's best meant to be out there in the world. But Ra'aruhu spoke a lot about neutrinos, which are subatomic particles. Okay. And back in the day, their mass was thought to be 0. But in fact, they do have a mass that's, it's crazy. If I'm getting this right, I really hope I am. Science people, you can correct me. At once, it's like, seems like it's 0, but on the other hand, it's like infinitesimal. So it's just like so trippy to even think about, because it's like so small that it passes through things undetected, and it literally comes from the stars. So you can also think about that on the level of astrology. So like that is a way of explaining how astrology works. I mean, there's so many other ways to explain it as well. But because at certain moments of time, there's certain like patterns of neutrinos, like trillions of them passing through things. You can take a snapshot of that, right? Which is your birth time, for example. And there's an energetic signature to that, right? And that energetic signature we can look at in a human design chart. We can also look at it in a natal chart in astrology, right? And I mean, you don't necessarily have to be spiritual to care about astrology, human design. That's fine. But it's this idea that there's some kind of organizing principle to the universe, right? And there's some things that we can't fully explain, right? I mean, we can explain a decent amount with science, but then there's always a limit, right? So,
but yeah, I mean, that's mind blowing. I actually got a book a couple of years ago and still sitting, of course, on my pile. It's called Quantum Physics for My Dog, which is supposed to like explain all of these science in a very easy way. I'm probably going to dive into it during the holidays, but it's just so mind blowing. Yeah. I've read through all of Joe Dispenza's books. They're all on our book section if you want to look into books to dive deeper into the subject. But to bring back also this concept of we are all interconnected, there is clearly some science behind it. And I feel when we reconnect with ourselves and we dive into deeper states of consciousness, also just through meditation, it is possible to access that wisdom, that inner wisdom of being connected with others. And I really love thinking about it, both intellectually and physically, feeling these connections. So definitely very intriguing. What did I want to say? I want to say also, this class, we're always introducing like topics that might not be comfortable or that might be new to people. So I really invite everyone to feel welcome. This workshop really welcomes individuals from all belief systems. We are inclusive. We're an inclusive platform. And what we really want to bring forth is simply a safe container for you to get new ideas. Maybe you want to say something about that, like how are we going to make sure that it's an inclusive workshop, an inclusive class?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like all questions are welcome, like just to say that, for the Q&A part. And I think it's good to be skeptical in general. Like I think it's really good. I think it's good to think critically about things. What's interesting about spirituality is I think to a certain extent it does require you to suspend, your critical thinking or, logical, rational certainty But at the same time, you know, just as a human being, like it's good to be skeptical of things, because when you're not, you know, that's how you end up in a cult or something, you know, like in terms of beliefs. But, you know, I really don't care what you believe as long as it's serving you. You know what I mean? So if you go to the workshop and you don't think anything I have to say is interesting or resonates, that's totally fine, you know, but just consider it, especially if you're like really skeptical, consider an opportunity to expand your mind in some way or challenge it, or maybe it confirms the beliefs you already have, whatever. Like that's cool. But yeah.
Absolutely. And maybe I just want to touch on a point that we didn't really like. I talked about the pillars and how we look at different holistic health pillars throughout our programs. And this month, we are providing our members with amazing journaling prompts to really dive deep into the subject of spirituality. But I guess maybe we could just elaborate a little bit about why it's important to have a spiritual practice. And it's something that, I mean, as much as nutrition and health, physical health and your relationships and your career, spirituality is extremely important to balance on your plate, you know? Why is that for you?
I mean, I have a super, super like personal connection to that whole thing, which is I had a lot of mental health stuff going on in my 20s. I've spoken to you about it before, you know, spoken about it to other people on my podcast, whatever. I don't have any shame about it. But it's really interesting because in the thick of it, you know, when I was taking medication, when I was feeling really lost, when I wasn't sure what was happening with my life, honestly, I had this incredible experience with the aid of psychedelics, just as a disclaimer, which I will say you don't need, period. You know, if you're curious, try it in a safe setting. But anyway, back to the story. I had this sensation that I don't know if I ever felt before in my life, which is that I'm going to be okay, you know, no matter what. And something greater than me is supporting me. And I was like, my mind was just blown, but it was this like visceral feeling that I couldn't fully describe. And so from then on, even though I probably continued to take medication for a couple years after that, and like, this is not to discredit medication or to say that it's a bad thing, but I think no one would argue, you know, the fact that when you're dealing with mental health, you need more than just medication. You have to, in my opinion, attack it holistically. So anyway, having that experience was super interesting. And when I've had especially difficult periods in my life, to come back to the perspective of, you know, as hard as it is, this is not a punishment, or it's like not about me deserving it or not deserving it. This has a lesson in it somehow. And, you know, I'm not saying like if something really terrible happens to you that you automatically have to like think of, oh, what's the lesson? Like, what, like, obviously you're allowed to be sad or angry or whatever it is, but to just see things in that perspective, to me, I just prefer it way more, instead of just being like, wow, things are happening to me and I'm so helpless and it doesn't mean anything. Like, that's another thing is I was really influenced by, and I still am influenced by, Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And, you know, this man was a Holocaust survivor, you know, in addition to being a psychotherapist, and he developed his own branch called logotherapy. And, his whole hypothesis was that no matter what, like, people need some kind of greater meaning in their lives. So whether that's God or money or whatever, like, I'm not going to judge that for you. You have to figure that out for yourself. But it's not it's not a very fun existence to move through life as if it's meaningless. Like, it can be fun, actually, in a way. But at least for me, fundamentally, I prefer to believe that there's some kind of greater meaning to my existence and to other people's existences too. Humanity, whatever.
Yeah, I love that. So you're very much in connection with like your surroundings. It's funny because, for example, for me, as I said before, it's really connected to my connection to self. But I can also relate to what you just said about being able to feel part of a greater scheme and knowing your purpose in life and knowing that you're here to fulfill that purpose and that someone gave you that purpose. It really helps me to move forward. I mean, we are both avid readers of the Course in Miracles, which is definitely, I wouldn't say it's 101. It's like a little bit, I don't know, maybe it is 101. For me, it was a tool that came much later in my spiritual journey because I was like, what is this woo-woo stuff,
Yeah.
And just the teachings of this book, which is just very simple to the point, if accompanied as well by someone who can explain each lesson, is really life-changing when you start looking at spirituality and your sense of connection with whatever is out there. It's written in a way that is very Christian in a way, but it's always been said that you can replace the names with whatever deity or element you believe in. So
yeah, and I think also, like, for example, it says like the Son of God a lot, and you can think of that as Jesus Christ or whatever, but it's also just all of creation, for example. But yeah, Course in Miracles is honestly like so trippy. It's really interesting. But yeah, similar to you, this is not what I was reading like 5 years ago when I was still like, I don't know what I believe in. It might be a little more advanced, let's say, but I also think it's something that kind of like calls you, you know what I mean? And it's also just, I think it's important to just trust when certain information comes to you. And, maybe 1 year you're not really ready in a lot of ways, but then the next year you are. Or, something that you thought was silly a few months ago, now you're like, oh, wait, maybe it's not, maybe I want to engage with this. So yeah, but I mean, I actually read Marianne Williamson's A Return to Love before I went through A Course in Miracles. And full disclosure, I'm not done A Course in Miracles yet. Like, if I finish this year, which I will, like, that'll be my first time actually doing it because I started and stopped. But I read A Return to Love first, and she extrapolates a lot of the teachings of A Course in Miracles because she is still a teacher of it. And one of the main things is just remembering that if we're going to talk about what's real and what's not real, the only thing that's real is love, and everything else, so like fear, for example, is a complete illusion. So it can be hard sometimes to see certain things in the world and think of it that way, like, oh, how could this be an illusion? Like, this is real because maybe lives are being lost or whatever it is. But if you can come from the perspective of, oh, this thing that's terrible or whatever it is was created from a place of illusion, right? And on a deep level, it's not really real, if that makes sense. And even in a small way, it's like, if you're, wanting to make a change in your life and you're scared, to just remind yourself, like, the fear actually isn't real. Like, that's not what's part of you. That's not what is really a part of you. What is a part of you is the love and the passion and the excitement you have for doing the thing or making that choice, as scary as it might be. So, like, that's a smaller way to look at it, instead of just like, what's going on in the world, or on a more macro level.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that reminder. I was actually while I was looking this way, I was looking at all the post-its that I wrote down from the Course in Miracles that just stuck out for me. And yeah, this concept of illusion versus love is super strong.
Yeah. And also, forgiveness is a big part of it, and letting go of grievances, it's called, which means that, even if there's people or whatever that are doing things out of fear and illusion, to not hold it against them, right? Like, that's what's truly powerful, to not condemn them as being a bad or evil person. We're all human. None of us are perfect. But then on the flip side, arguably, we are perfect, because perhaps there's something greater that created us in their image, right? As the text would say. But yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, we went on a little bit of a rant here, and I'm trying to find actually the page with all the info about your class, trying not to close any tab which might interrupt our chat.
Yep.
But our class, your class, which is hosted by Aura Collective, will be held on the 30th of November from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. It's called Spirituality for Beginners. And as you described it, it's going to be a mind-expanding crash course in spirituality. And yeah, what we really like, I love the outcomes that you pointed out for the class, which is just a chance to set aside daily tasks and obligations, an exploration of the self and the universe, being empowered to move through whatever it is that you're going through. So it's like not it's more than just about spirituality. It's really about giving you tools to maybe navigate a moment right now in your life that you are struggling. And if you follow our holistic forecast for the month, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are needing this right now. But yeah, it's tools, it's little seeds. Every class is an opportunity to connect with us, to learn from our community, to connect with the community. Soon classes will be only available within the membership. So I strongly and I urge you to take part in this class, and just come into our world and feel safe. We create containers that make people feel safe and seen, and where you can share. So you're very welcome to join us. Even if you think you might have a spiritual practice, maybe you'll learn something more about this field from Bianca. And I don't know if you want to add anything else.
No, that's all. You summed it up. Looking forward to seeing all of you in the class in a couple weeks.
Yes. Just, I keep putting my. Yeah. So see you everyone very, very soon. Thank you, Bianca, for your time, for answering all my questions. And yeah, really looking forward to this and to having the recording in our membership. So you'll be able to access it also via the app very, very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Flavia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.